Welcome to Back at the Movies, the podcast where we revisit our favorite Siskel and Ebert episodes.
Almost 50 years ago, two Chicago film critics, Gene Siskel.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And Roger Ebert.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Were hired to discuss movies on a local PBS station. They were rivals and competitors, and over 3 decades, they never missed a chance to let the other one know he was wrong.
Their passion for film made them television stars and helped pave the way for a generation of movie lovers, including your hosts, Dylan Wilcox and Miranda Broder. I'm your co-host, Dylan Wilcox, a movie buff who went from selling popcorn at the local movie theater to working in Hollywood.
And I'm your co-host, Miranda Broder, an English and film teacher living in the Bay Area. We've experienced so many movies together throughout the years, and so many discoveries were thanks to Siskel and Ebert.
We'll be reviewing the movies and the reviewers, discussing if the films hold up and if their opinions hold up, as we hope to discover and rediscover some gems along the way.
This is Back at the Movies, and the balcony is open.
The summer of 1989 at the multiplex was all about Batman and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. But by August 5th, it was time to make room for the grown-ups, with 2 very different movies about adults, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and Parenthood. We passed on watching Young Einstein and a melodrama called The Music Teacher, but we couldn't wait to revisit future Oscar winner Steven Soderbergh's Cannes sensation and future Oscar winner Ron Howard's multi-generational dramedy. What's it like revisiting the movie that kickstarted the independent film movement of the 90s? And does the movie that introduced us to the Diarrhea song still tug at our heartstrings? Join us as we dive into this and more back at the movies.
So our first film today is called Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and I'm very excited about this movie because it's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's directed by Steven Soderbergh. It was his first film, aside from his film school shorts. It stars James Spader, Andie MacDowell, Peter Gallagher, Laura San Giacomo. And even though it's called Sex, Lies, and Videotape, it's not necessarily really about sex as much as it is about vulnerability and connection and all sorts of good stuff like that. Let's see what the boys have to say about it.
Our first film is the surprise grand prize winner at this year's Cannes Film Festival. It's called Sex, Lies, and Videotape, a low-budget but extremely well-directed investigation of the sex lives of a bunch of contemporary characters. At first, we see a cheating husband in the aftermath of having had sex with his wife's sister. That's Peter Gallagher and Laura San Giacomo as the adulterous couple. The husband's old college friend is played by the terrific young actor James Spader, and he's a strange guy who is attracted to his friend's wife, a sexually shy woman played by Andie MacDowell.
Giacomo.
I know, I was going to say, why does he not do just a tiny bit of research to find out how to pronounce people's names?
Yeah.
I guess that's a tribute to the fact that she's gone on to make a lot of other things that we know exactly how to pronounce her name. So
I think we need to start a running list of the names that they butcher.
Yes.
And we'll add Giacomo. It should be like the Siskel and Ebert Nadel Nadizim Award.
Totally. So yes, this is a very intelligent movie, a simple story, but super well told. I think it's an example of fabulous writing. It's one of the best scripts that I've ever come in contact with. Can I give an example of what I mean by that, or do you want to talk a little bit about what you thought of it?
Yeah. Do you want to do Siskel's thumbs up first?
Sure.
The performances are first rate. The camera work and the subject is mesmerizing. Director Steve Soderbergh gives us a world in which people lie about sex outwardly and can only express themselves with private obsessions. Winning the prize at Cannes suggests that this film has achieved some kind of greatness. I think that's overstating it a bit, but Sex, Lies, and Videotape is refreshingly adult, beautifully shot, and extremely well acted. James Spader, who won the grand prize as Best Actor at Cannes, charges this movie with a special kind of unpredictable energy. It's a really fine performance and surprising in the quiet moments. That's what I particularly enjoyed. He isn't just shouting out. He's quiet and surprising when he's getting minimal. This is more of a small exercise of the film, but exceedingly well done.
I agree with what he's saying. I think that it's a story that is mostly told through dialogue. For instance, I'll give you an example. At the beginning of the story, it starts off, Annie McDowell is talking to her psychologist. And, we learn a lot about her as a character. It's a lot of exposition about, what's going on in the story. But aside from that, we learn a lot about who she is by the things that she is revealing. So at one point, the psychologist asks her, "What do you like about marriage?" And she says, "The stability, the house, John's promotion." To me, that is showing us who she is as a person, like what she's prioritizing and what she's avoiding telling us as well.
Yeah, what she's not saying.
What she's not saying. I mean, a bad writer would have had her answer something like, "I don't like my husband that much." But instead, we hear about she enjoys the stability. She enjoys that. The fact that she says that and the fact that he's successful tells us that there's probably not much of a connection emotionally between the two of them. It's definitely, he is the capitalist who thinks I can get away with anything, and if I can get away with it, it's fair game. Whereas his friend Graham used to be more like him and has now discovered that he'd rather live a simpler life that's less complicated and doesn't require so much lying. And I love the scene when he talks about his keys. I still quote that all the time. It feels so real to me. Like, she wants him to go and get an apartment, and he says, "Well, then I'd have to get more keys. I like having the one key, the key to my car. And, if I go and I do the apartment, then I'll probably have to get a job, and then they may want me to open and close, and that's more keys." And I feel like that sometimes. Like, what are we working for? We're working so that we can maintain this lifestyle that we have to work for. What did you think, Dylan?
I think this movie is so dumb. I'm just kidding. It's great.
Sorry.
I know this isn't a visual medium, but I needed to get a reaction.
What was my
Well, you were taking a drink of water, and I thought a spit take was coming, but unfortunately,
that was all. I was kind of looking at you. I have so much respect for you, Dylan, and I was still trying to make room for that answer.
I know, and you were giving no leeway. You were like, "This is great, and this is why."
And if you disagree with me, then you're just full of it.
I should have let it go a little bit longer. No, I think this movie is so good. The screenplay is amazing. I was wondering how it was going to feel, knowing that it ushered in this era of independent film. And is it going to feel old and creaky? And I don't think so. It felt actually really relevant.
Yeah.
Ebert loved it too. Let's hear what he said, and then we can talk more.
These people are ordinary people in some ways. They're strange people in other ways. They're leading lives that are particular and specific. They talk in the way that they speak rather than the way that movie characters speak.
I know what you're saying.
They surprise us by things they reveal about themselves, and so that we're alert from the beginning to the end of this movie because we're interested in these people and we don't know what's going to happen.
Well, it's like what you said, Miranda, about just learn so much through the dialogue. I forgot, a few things. I forgot that it was just the four of them. There's one or two other smaller characters, but it really does feel like a play. I remembered so much more than I thought I was going to. I saw this not in the theater. I saw it at home really close to when it came out. So I was 12, 13. This is definitely in the bucket of adult movies that I was so excited I was kind of understanding, even though I might not have understood as much. I just kind of felt there's certain movies that we've been watching that I start taking notes. And even if I love it, I'll still take notes. And this one, I just kind of let it soak in because it really is so well constructed. And it is like it's my favorite kind of writing where you're just peeling layers of an onion. Like you said, another example of showing, not telling is they didn't have to go into a big backstory about the competitive nature between the girls. It's one line that Cynthia Lawrence-San Giacomo's character says, just about being in your sister's bed gives me a perverse thrill. You're just like, okay, it's so there's a suspense in how these characters are going to relate to each other.
Not only is the dialogue and the writing so strong. So that scene that you're talking about, she says that, like the beautiful, the popular, talking about her sister, and you could just feel the contempt Also, I read through the script a little bit. The scene when she's talking to Graham and he's telling her about what he does on the with these tapes, she's getting more and more uncomfortable. Like she has this glass of tea, iced tea in her hand, and the tea just keeps on like risking falling. And you can see as the viewer, like, oh shoot, that's gonna fall. Our instinct.
Totally. I remember watching that, and then he points it out, and it just it just makes tense. And this movie has a lot of tension in it for something that really is about talking and about.
But that wasn't written into the script. That was just Andie MacDowell doing that.
That's great. She's so good. And they're all so good in this.
Yeah, I think this film also opened doors for other kind of indie films to come. Like,
yeah, it really ushered in.
Like Greta Gerwig, I think.
Sundance. Miramax. This is one of Miramax's first releases. Also shows they released the movie Scandal around this time, and they really leaned into the title Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I mean, they were shameless in the way that they promoted the sex of these movies, especially early on in the Miramax's sordid history. And it's interesting, it's 1989, and it kind of closes out the decade, the Reagan decade, the capitalist decade, as you talked about. And it does feel kind of counterculture in that way of, okay, but what have we really been doing? What is it all?
What are we doing it for?
Yeah, what are we doing it for?
Why are we doing it? The last scene is such a simple, it's just like a kind of, not run down, but just kind of older building sitting on the steps. It's very simple, but it's like so romantic at the same time. And you can really feel the love.
I don't know if that last scene was earned for me, but let's hear, they talk about this a little bit in clip 4, and then we can talk about it.
You can't, there's no way that you can figure out it, with one exception. There's a turnabout, and this is where I thought the film broke a little bit in its freshness. There's a turnabout at the end that I could spot coming right away. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we're crying out. We always talk about this, it seems, every week. We're crying out for characters that approximate human intelligence. And here's a group of 4 that really do.
And it's all great performances. Now, Spader won the Best Actor award in Cannes, and we did a show actually more than a year ago.
Right.
We singled him out as an up-and-coming young actor, but actually, in this movie, it's kind of unfair. He's the fulcrum. He's the guy that comes into the situation, so he gets the attention.
Right.
But this movie is well acted in every single performance.
Yeah, I was impressed.
Including the ones that are not quite as showy as this.
I was impressed with this Andie MacDowell. She's a famous model, and she was in Greystoke, where they dubbed her voice because they didn't think she was strong enough.
Yeah.
Well, here she gives a really fine performance. She gets the last word on that subject.
Okay.
I totally forgot about the Greystoke scandal. I remember hearing about it at the time. What break is he talking about at the end? Is that when she turns the tables?
I don't quite know what he's talking about there.
It does feel, and I guess I'm fine with it, but it feels the movie doesn't feel cynical, but it does feel very talking about the things that you can't talk about. So it's interesting that it does end on a hopeful note for the Andie MacDowell character, because it could have just been like, this is no one's satisfied. And I thought it was an interesting choice. And I think maybe that helped it probably more successful.
Yeah. I love the ending. It's a perfect way to end that film. I don't see it as hopeful as much as just a slice of life. It looks like it's going to rain. It is raining. It's not necessarily hopeful. It's kind of cathartic, maybe. We can kind of sigh a little bit of relief because our earth is being watered now.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
Cleansing.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's one of those ones where it's so pretty and beautiful and poetic that you almost don't want to decipher too much out of the ending, because it kind of takes away a little bit of the power of it.
Also, the hopeful is when she goes to visit her sister at the bar and they're talking. That's kind of made me feel hopeful too, that this didn't end their sisterhood and their relationship.
Yeah, and that was a perfectly well done scene too. Like, it could have so easily gone into this corny, I'm so sorry, or they could have had a fight.
Yeah.
They just bypassed all of that. It's like not needed. What is needed to know is that they were able to somehow come to some kind of repairment. Their relationship wasn't completely wonderful again, which is, this is life.
It's never going to be.
It's never going to be. But I think there was a bit of understanding between the two of them. and forgiveness. I felt that forgiveness between the two of them.
Miranda, have you been watching this movie throughout the years, or was this your first revisit in a while?
I've watched it throughout the years. I watch it about every 5 years or so.
Okay.
I really enjoy watching it a lot. And I think I haven't watched it for probably a good maybe 10 years because it hasn't been on streaming and I couldn't find it for a long time. And then finally Amazon has it there to buy. But
now you own it.
Now I own it, so I can watch it whenever. Another thing that I find sort of like personally interesting to me is this idea that she has this kind of guilt at the beginning of the film. She talks about it, and she talks about it a couple other times. This guilt over not being able to do more. It's almost like it has to come hand in hand when you become this lucky to be so, comfortable in life. It's like you can't just accept that comfort. We have to punish ourselves in some way. And she's punishing herself by worrying about like the garbage in the world. And never.
You talked about the keys, that garbage line. I think I've thought of throughout the years. When I think about climate change, I often think of Anna McDowell going, garbage. That's the first line of dialogue.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. Yeah. It's like it starts out with garbage and then it ends with a cleansing rain.
Yeah.
Or the possibility of it.
Yeah. And, the fact that that garbage discussion is all about her not having any control over her life or not thinking she has control over it. And then, that again, like comes back at the end. Yeah, we can't control when the rain happens, but we can enjoy the rain. It's how we kind of look at it, right? It's how we
totally
experience it. When I first saw this movie, I have kind of like a good memory of this movie, like the actual day that I saw it in theater. I was about 15, I think. No, I must have been 16 because I had my license. And I had newly had my license. And I cut school to go see it. And I saw it by myself in a theater in the middle of the day when I should have been in school. And I absolutely loved it. And then afterwards, I was walking by this little jewelry store in downtown Walnut Creek that I liked, this little kind of like hippie jewelry store called Ming Kwang. Which is no longer there anymore. They just went under actually recently. But I went in and I saw that, they were hiring. So I went and filled out an application and I got the job, and it was a huge turning point in my life.
I love that because I always remember you working there. So funny that it was after this movie.
Yeah.
Not that everything is always about the Oscars, but the screenplay is so good. And this is a year it's always stuck out as the movie. It's 4 great scripts, and the one I didn't love won. And I haven't seen it since the theater, so I think we should put it on our list to rewatch. Dead Poets Society won that year. And the other nominees were Crimes and Misdemeanors by Woody Allen, Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Steven Soderbergh, and When Harry Met Sally, Nora Ephron.
Yeah.
I'm like, what a year. Yeah.
Those are all like good movies.
Maybe I'll love Dead Poets Society, but I can attest the other 4 are so blazingly original and iconic in their own different ways.
Yes.
What an interesting way to close out the 90s. When you think of, you're like, oh, big blockbusters and big studio movies. And that's when the 70s indie spirit died. And it just makes me hopeful. Yeah.
Those are 4, like those movies that you just mentioned. I would even include Dead Poets Society. They're all such great movies that have stood the test of time. Like it just goes to show like the quantity of great films that were coming out.
Yeah, really set the stage for the 90s.
Yeah. So if you are looking for a film that is super well written, very lyrical, very poetic, in a lot of ways, also good cutting. I think that's the mark of a good filmmaker is knowing what to cut and knowing that we don't need to over-explain everything and giving your audience a little bit of credit for having a brain.
Yeah.
And not needing to be like, completely just, they don't need to be told a story. They need to be shown a story.
Yeah. There's a great shot of a woman that he's recording, and then it's the same profile of James Spader watching it.
Do you think that James Spader is, that his character is all that creepy? Like, did your feeling of him change watching it now versus when you first watched it? Did you think?
Absolutely. I remember thinking he was creepy, and now it just kind of all makes a little bit more sense.
Like, you don't see him as being quite as creepy, as more sort of just a broken soul.
And I think he's kind of like creepy at the beginning, but then you get a little bit into the why, and it feels less creepy. I think, especially when you think of so much more creepy behavior out there. But I think it's also a testament to the screenplay but by the end, the successful lawyer is the creepy one.
Yeah, and he's actually, the Graham character is the more moral. I always found him to be like attractive, a very attractive character, because he was done with lying, and he was so much done with lying that he was even admitting that you have to, once a liar, always a liar. It's like alcoholism. You're always in recovery, which is a very honest way of looking at, a problem that you have, and very like much owning it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, like, he was a character that I would have probably fallen in love, a person I would have probably fallen in love with, because he was so honest. He was so interesting, weird, quirky, vulnerable, and, easy on the eyes. and he had made a lot of movies prior to this where he was kind of like the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
You remember? Like, this was kind of a turn for him, because he had always played, he was in Pretty in Pink, and he kind of played the rich guy from the right side of the tracks, and you're supposed to hate him, but he kind of had that persona, and then he made this movie, and it really kind of showed us what he could do acting wise.
Yeah.
So I would give it, what would you give it, Dylan?
Of course, thumbs up.
Of course, thumbs up. Totally worthwhile.
I won't try to gaslight you again.
What if I was like, so yeah, I can't recommend it?
Yes.
No, one of my favorite movies of all time, right up there with The Graduate, Wizard of Oz, Sense and Sensibility. It's
some of these I give thumbs up because it's kind of interesting as not a historical record, but, of its time. And it has that, but it also felt really, still hypnotic. So thumbs up for me. The boys obviously loved it.
Yep.
We start this episode, Kumbaya. And now we come to Parenthood, directed by Ron Howard. He made this after Splash, Gung Ho, Willow. So already a huge director. The cast, it's going to take me about an hour to name them, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's unreal. Steve Martin, Mary Steenburgen, Diane Wiest, Jason Robards, Rick Moranis again, Tom Hulse, Amadeus, Martha Plimpton, who I love, and then Keanu Reeves to boot. One of his earlier ones.
Yep.
Harley Jane Kozak, who was a great actress that I was reminded of how much I liked her. Yep. Leaf Phoenix, Joaquin, aka Leaf Little Baby.
Yes.
You might be able to tell by my voice that I have a lot of affection for this movie. I remember seeing it in the theater. I saw it a bunch when it came out. This is how I learned the when you're sliding into first and you're feeling something burst, diarrhea. And Steve Martin's line, when they say they learned it at camp, and Steve Martin goes, "That's money well spent." That's a line that made it into my family's lexicon. This was in that sweet spot. I seen it a lot, and I know I liked it, but it had been a while. And I was also a little bit like, well, is this going to be like some of the other comedies we watched where that I know it so well that it's not going to feel as funny, or is it going to feel a little, creaky? I still loved it. I thought it was great. Here's Siskel talking about it, and then we can hear what the boys thought.
Next film is called Parenthood, and it's a wonderfully well-written piece about the exquisite joy and heartbreaking pain of being a parent or a child. We meet a whole bunch of parents and their kids, and the film cuts back and forth among them episodically. Most of the episodes work quite well. Rick Moranis plays a father who wants his little daughter to become a genius. Steve Martin plays his brother-in-law and a dad who takes a more hang-loose approach to his children.
And then Siskel goes on in the next clip.
Martha Plimpton is wonderful there. She's another actor that we had singled out as quite exceptional. She's in Running on Empty. She's a real fine talent. This film is exceedingly well cast. The special quality of the movie Parenthood is that it juggles, though, so many characters so well, building a mosaic of family life. The film has been well cast, most particularly well written by Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel. There are probably close to 100 little scenes here, and the vast majority of them work with laughter and with wisdom. I sat there enjoying the film's sensitivity to just how much work parents devote to their children. It's most entertaining.
I love also with Sex, Lies, and Videotape and James Spader, their little victory laps of, oh, we called it. And they're right, because they're both so good. So, Miranda, I'm curious to hear what you thought, especially since you are a parent, which you were not when this movie came out.
That's right. So I had fairly low expectations going into watching it for this most recent time, partially because I don't remember loving it when it first came out. I remember some of the lines in it that being really funny and quotable, but I don't remember like putting it like on my top list or anything. Like I just I thought it was like kind of, I don't know, mediocre or something at the time, mediocre humor. But watching it recently, it has actually gotten better with age. I watched it with my daughter. I asked her if she would watch it with me, and it was a perfect movie for us to watch together. And she and I both really, really liked it. And I actually cried at the end. And I don't remember crying at it like at the beginning. When I first watched it, it was not, like a tear, didn't bring on tears. But I definitely related to it a lot more, like just that idea that there's that roller coaster analogy.
Yeah.
Right? That it's a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but it's worth it in the end because it's an adventure.
Yeah. Ebert talks about the roller coaster. I don't know if it's in this clip, but let's hear him talk about it.
Yeah.
The director, Ron Howard, has made in the last few years, in terms of the commercial Hollywood cinema, one of the best movies about old people, Cocoon.
Right.
And now one of the best movies about middle-aged people, young people, whole families.
Right.
This movie is filled with moments of recognition, moments of observation in which you are hearing and seeing the way that parents and children relate to each other and some of the things that they go through. And by the end of the film, where they get into that metaphor about the roller coaster,
Right.
and then he uses the soundtrack in order to suggest that that's going on inside of Steve Martin's head, it's a risky moment. You don't know if a gimmick like that's going to work. It really does work. It really does pull the whole movie together. It's a very good movie.
Yeah, I think that was a powerful scene at the end when the kid's on the stage, and then there's he has to make a choice. Does he embrace the chaos and just he looks over at his wife and she's got a big smile on her face.
Yeah, she's
and
enjoying the ride.
Half the audience is getting uptight, and the other half of the audience is actually smiling and laughing and kind of seeing the joy. I mean, this is like a kid's play. Like, who the hell cares if it goes a little off?
Right.
We're not talking about Broadway here.
Another way that I feel deeply connected to this movie is the one year I was in Little League. My dad was the coach because they couldn't find anyone. And I was one of the worst players on the team. And I hated going. And my poor dad didn't like going deal with me. And so the whole Little League thing with Gil and Kevin, I just really feel it. I related to it then. And now I don't have kids. But thinking of seeing it now that I'm older. Oh, by the way, Miranda.
Yes.
Steve Martin's character, there's 35 in this movie. So we just have to sit with that.
What you will.
Yeah. So we just have to sit with that.
Yeah, they were like little spring chickens. Like when we find out that one of the characters ends up having a baby at the end, I'm thinking, wasn't she like in her 50s? No, actually, she's in her 30s.
I always thought that Steve Martin was the older sibling, and then rewatching, and I'm like, this math doesn't make sense. And I'm like, oh no, Diane Weist's character is the oldest.
Yeah, she's great in this film.
Yeah, and I think it does a great job of mixing slapstick humor and more nuanced dramatic moments and the melodrama, and it just achieves a little bit of everything. You have the more broad stuff with Rick Moranis and the kid, and his kid, But then you have the kind of the tougher stuff with Diane Wiest and Gary, and I'd never noticed this before, the scene when he calls his dad about staying with him, the way it's shot, and that it's kind of shot through a mirror and there's distance between the mom and the kid. I was reminded what a great director Ron Howard is, and I don't love a lot of his movies, but this just really felt like it was firing on all cylinders. I don't know, I just really didn't, it felt, it felt timeless. It feels timeless.
Yeah. I particularly like the scene when the daughter goes to pick up her film, like her pictures from the.
Oh, so good.
And then I turned to my daughter at one point. I was like, "You do realize that this is how we used to have to do it, right? It would take like a week to get back your." And they were touting like it's 1 hour photos. Like that was like big time. But anyway, she picks up the photos and she picks up the wrong ones. And then she gets home to her mom, and her mom's looking through the photos, and she's like, "I think I like this one the best." She's like, "I'm going to put this as my in my wallet."
Here's one for my wallet. Again, Diane Wiest, brilliant. She was nominated for this.
Yes.
Oh, she's so good. Everyone in it. It's so weird that Keanu Reeves ended up being the biggest star, but he has a great moment talking about that great line. Another one I've thought about. You know, they let any butt-weeman asshole be a father.
Yes, that's definitely a classic. I remember that line from it too. That was like, to me, that was what I came away with. Like when I saw it the first time too, was like, I thought that's the most profound thing.
Yeah, it is more profound than you would think it will be. And it still feels profound. And Siskel actually talks about this in clip 8.
Well, it reminded me of the conclusion of Eddie Hall, where Woody Allen talks about why we need relationships and uses a joke to talk as a metaphor for about needing the eggs and needing the joys. And this is the same kind of message, and it's equally well done in that moment. I am amazed at just how they don't stick. When I first heard the title Parenthood, I assumed that it was going to be about yuppie parents, if you will, and little kids. And they could have done that. That would have been the standard thing. Instead, you get the whole range, because Steve Martin not only is a parent, he's also a child. And you see all of those relationships.
And his father is also a child.
Right.
Because the old grandmother, as Jason Robart said, yeah, she's still alive.
Right.
So that you have generation after generation, and the very oldest one is the one who has achieved the most wisdom.
They're so right that it didn't have to be this good and about this so much. It could have just been like, oh, aren't kids crazy? Isn't this hard? Another line that I've often thought of is when Jason Robart says, you know, it never ends.
Yeah.
And you think that, oh, 18, well, your job sometimes is just beginning. And that made me think about all the trials and tribulations I've had as an adult, and the times that I might get teared up, that my parents have worried about me well into my 40s. It's just, it just strikes that chord.
That really did strike a chord with me watching it this time too, because I remember having a conversation with my father when I was pregnant with my first child 20 years ago, and asking him well, first of all, I asked him, when did you feel like an adult? When did you finally feel like an adult? And he said, when he had kids. And then I said, and how did life change for you after you had kids? Like, how were you different? And he said, I have not had a good night's sleep since I've had children.
Wow.
Like, I mean, he probably wouldn't even remember saying that to me, but
yeah,
I think it's kind of true. It's like you're always sleeping with a little bit of one eye open, even when your kids are adults, because you're always worried, like you're always worried about your kids no matter what. And you basically signed up for this thing where you're going to be forever with an open wound.
And Mary Steenburgen talks about that when she says, the first one, you're just so worried. And then by the third one, you let them juggle knives. Yeah, this movie has a lot of wisdom, but it still feels, I guess, the wisdom of being a parent is eternal.
I do come back to that moment when Keanu Reeves talking about anybody could be a parent. Like, I remember when I the day I was taking my daughter home from the hospital after having her, thinking, they're going to let me take her home? This is like something. What? How do
You're
they
like, I
know
didn't have
I'm,
to.
like suitable
How
to
did they
take
know I'm
care
not
of
going to
her?
kill
Like
her?
exactly. Like I made her. Yeah, I made her, and I probably could have given birth to her without like hospital intervention. But still, it felt like we're used to as Americans when we bring stuff home that we bought it.
Yeah. Or a lease.
Yeah,
like
or
you're like, I don't
leased
have
it.
to like give it back after 6 weeks.
Yeah, no one's gonna come and monitor. Like, how do you know I'm gonna do a good job? Like, it just
Yeah.
seemed like you're giving me a human life, like a baby. How how do you know I'm gonna take good care of it? It's so fragile. It just blew my mind. It was very like surreal. But at the same time, they're giving you this little life that you're gonna be taken care of, and you're never gonna sleep well again. But at the same time,
You'd have it no other way.
well, it's like it's just part of life. Like I remember calling my mom up at one point when I was feeling a little blue. Like, you get the baby blues after a couple weeks, sometimes after you've had a baby. And I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, how am I gonna like have a social life? How am I gonna travel? How am I gonna be able to go to movies? And how am I gonna do this? And she's like, you just bring the baby with you. And I was like, oh yeah.
But it is that push and pull that I think the movie zeroes in on and does make it more profound. And they talk about this in our last clip.
What I like about this screenplay and about the movie is they always find a way to twist things. So that almost always, when you have a little scene that could end in a kind of a TV sitcom way with a nice, happy little resolution, then there's perhaps a darker side to it, or there's one more line to it that shows you that the movie isn't going for cheap, self-congratulatory payoffs, but showing how in life you never really get home free. There's always some kind of a toll to pay.
Let's mention the writers' names again: Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel. Fine job.
Lowell Gans he was a sitcom writer. He did didn't he do Happy Days and The Odd Couple, Jody Loves Chachi, Laverne and Shirley? And then he went on to his second film was Splash, which was also a big hit.
Oh. And then he did City Slickers. A lot of the movies that we have been watching don't hold up, but movies like this make me nostalgic for big studio movies that were broad and commercial, but also heartfelt.
Right.
And sometimes it feels like you have to decide one or the other right now. And it wasn't always the case.
The Babalu Mandel also worked on Splash and City Slickers. He also wrote A League of Their Own.
Oh, another great one.
Yeah. I would say that if I had one complaint about the film, I'm watching it now, one kind of caveat, like this is partly just dated in what we accept in 2024. But this Keanu Reeves character, he is like this kind of flighty, kind of screw up guy, but with a heart and everything, and ends up helping her son out a lot and being a good like male figure in her son's life. But at one point, he calls Martha Plimpton a bitch. Actually, he does it a couple of times. There's like a couple of points where one point he's called her a bitch, and then at another point they got in a fight, and he was like, he's just kind of went over the top. Like I feel like nowadays, if that were made, they would have made a different choice because that kind of makes him super unsympathetic that he would even use that word.
Yeah. I also feel like you couldn't do the sniper jokes now. And then there's a weird part when Harley Kozak's character, it's a very throwaway line when she's in the classroom before Rick Moranis comes in to win her back. And she goes, we're already behind because of yesterday's bomb threat. I'm like, what? It made me sad that all of these things were so removed. Back then, it just felt more of such a remote possibility that you could joke about it. Whereas now active shooter drills just made me had a moment of depression in an otherwise charming movie. I'm like, oh my God, it should be better now, not worse.
It's definitely gotten way worse. Yep. I found that actually kept it really very relevant, actually, that sort of thing we are still doing.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess I would give this movie a thumbs up. I think before I watched it for this most recent time, I would have given it a thumbs to the side, which I know is not a thing to do, but now I actually would give it a thumbs up because I definitely think it's worthwhile if you're a parent or if you're not a parent. I think everybody can relate to it because everyone has been the child of a parent or a parent, right? So anyone can relate to this movie. I think somebody will find something relatable no matter who you are. And it's just it is well done. It's well written, and the cast is like really fun.
Yeah, because we all have parents, even if we're not parents.
Yeah.
I knew I loved this movie, but I was also a little nervous because I was like, is this going to hold up? And I was so happy that it did. Thumbs up for me, too. The boys liked it. One big happy family this episode. I love it. Thanks for listening to Back at the Movies. I'm your host, Dylan Wilcox.
And I'm your host, Miranda Broder. You can find us on social and Letterboxd at BATMPOD. That stands for Back at the Movies Pod. We'd like to thank our producer, Travis Bone, and Jay Edwards for the original music.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please give us 2 thumbs up by rating us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. That's our show, and until next time, the balcony is still closed.